have any questions directly related to this topic, then maybe just you could broaden it, let's open the door a bit, let's make it wider for other type of questions, yeah? Oh, sorry, there were questions from online, because this was live streamed. Okay, so a question is, do people like Dawkins realize and understand what you're saying about ER, and what does that mean for them and the way they push their views? Well, I don't know. You need to ask Dawkins. But he's come out with a very interesting book recently. It's called Outgrowing God, A Beginner's Guide. And he has words in it which are quite interesting for our topic today. He's got titled topics like myths and how they start. But is it true? Do we need God in order to be good? Surely there must be a designer, question mark. And stuff like that. So if you read some of the chapters, and I haven't read the book, but I flicked through it, he's making some knowledge and truth claims. So I would question Dawkins and say, well, under the Darwinian mechanism, under Darwinism, can you basically justify the fact that you have truth, reliable, cognitive faculties, right? Can you justify that? Because your truth claims and your assertions assume you have reliable, cognitive faculties that produce true beliefs. Can that assumption though be justified under the thing that you're advocating as well in this book? No, in my view. So yeah, I mean, look, if you Google this topic, very hard to find something substantial. And if you even go on YouTube, right? So it's not like, you know, a discussed topic per se. And you have to understand that, you know, just because someone is a biologist doesn't mean they know philosophical stuff. Or they might do, or they might not do. And when it comes to these areas, it's very niche and specific that requires, you know, study. Now, someone may just focus on certain aspects of evolution or certain aspects of biology, and they may not be interested in the epistemological implications, the implications concerning truth and belief. It might not be practical for them. So I don't know whether people like Dawkins know about evolution, reliabilism, and the implications. I'm not sure. I don't think they've written a paper about it. I haven't seen any works that he's written on the topic. So yeah, and that's why maybe we should use these type of seminars to popularize these discussions so we could get, you know, people thinking. Oh, let me get the other questions that are online. Okay, there's a question that basically says, you talked about ER, evolution reliabilism. What's your views on evolution? Well, my views on evolution are irrelevant to this topic. What's relevant is my views on evolution reliabilism, which I've articulated here. But my views on evolution are, my approach is epistemic. So it's an epistemic weighting, something that if you search for Sabur Ahmed, he talks about that a lot on his channel, Darwinian Delusions, and you have it on the IRA channel, and you see some of his debates with academics on this topic, which is very simple. It's basically the Darwinian mechanism is based on a probabilistic framework. It has assumptions and it has some disputes about certain aspects of it, right? What do we mean by probabilistic framework? Well, just like what Richard Dawkins said in The Devil's Chaplain, you may have a few years in the future, we may have evidence that goes against the Darwinian mechanism. We may reject it altogether. And that's the beauty of science, because you don't have all the data and you haven't discovered everything, and we may have discoveries in the future, observations in the future that undermine our current conclusions. Even Richard Dawkins says that, right? So it's probabilistic. It has assumptions. Darwinian mechanism has some philosophical assumptions that you can't really prove directly. For example, gradualism. And it has some disputes, right? There's not a consensus on these disputes, but there are certain disputes, right? Concerning some aspects of the Darwinian mechanism. So if that's the case, why do I have to now put this into my creed? I don't have to. I don't have to believe in it from the point of view of what we understand in the Islamic context, which is aqidah, belief, right? I have certainty, spiritual intellectual certainty in this. No, because Darwinism is probabilistic, based on assumption, has disputes. But would I accept it practically? Of course. If I was a scientist, I mean, the majority of scientists accept it to be true, that it's a well-confirmed theory. Yes, there are some challenges to it, for sure. You can use it as a workable model to discover antibiotics. But do I believe it into my creed? No. So it's an epistemic weighting. I wouldn't suggest anyone refer to science in order for them to justify their theological beliefs anyway, by virtue of what science is. Science is beautiful. We love it, right? Ibn al-Haytham, I think his name was Hassan ibn al-Haytham. If you read the works of David C. Lindbergh, quotes him as a key milestone for the scientific method, a Muslim. He wrote the book on optics, right? The problem that we have today is that for some reason we have almost given the scientific method too much epistemological weight, too much epistemic weight that even scientists don't give. They don't even give it. They don't even give it that weight. So why are we giving it that weight? You know why? Because we're going through post-colonial trauma. That's why. And science, it's like the religion with the white coats. But we just have to be honest and say, look, science is a method of study, right? Generally speaking, science adopts methodological naturalism. What's methodological naturalism is different from philosophical naturalism that we discussed. Methodological naturalism basically says, for any scientific conclusion to be scientific, it can't refer to God and divine activity. That, generally speaking, is not a problem for Muslims because we believe the physical world is a manifestation of the divine will, so it's not a problem. In the backdrop, we could have our creedal metaphysical beliefs that argue that everything physical is a manifestation of the divine. No problem. And classical scholars held that view. So what's the problem? The problem is when we think, they're the same. Yeah? Oh, there's Big Bang in the Quran. Woohoo. No, there's not. Right? That's your interpretation. That's your squeezing of the data, yeah? That's your linguistic gymnastics. Just, look, Allah has the picture, we have the pixel. And most scientists and philosophers of science are humble and they understand that. And they say, you know what? We don't know. That's the beauty of science. We don't know. Yes, we have the metaphysical, philosophical truth of theism, of that Allah is a reality, and this whole universe is a manifestation of His irada, His will, and His qudra, and His power. And when you look into science and how things work, it just increases your iman, increases your intellectual and spiritual conviction. You're like, wow, what does this mean about the maker, about the creator? What does it mean about His wisdom and knowledge and power? Split the atom, yeah?
That's the way that we think as Muslims.
Yeah, but we should, because we have the correct backdrop, philosophical backdrop, theological backdrop, spiritual backdrop, yeah? But now, that doesn't mean now you have to force that conclusion, every scientific conclusion, because they're both slightly distinct. Do you see? Let the data speak for itself. It might be right, it might be wrong, but we have the correct spiritual, intellectual, philosophical filters. Now it could be that something goes against the Quran. So what? If you understood what I've just said, it should never be a big deal. Why would it be a big deal? If you understand the epistemic weighting, what is science, what is divine knowledge, if you can't reconcile them, then you don't throw science away, you don't throw the Quran away. You just understand there are two different sources of knowledge. And we just have a limited understanding. And that's how the Quran was, and that's the beauty of the Quran, the timeless nature of the Quranic discourse, right? It uses an ambiguous language when it talks about natural phenomena in such a way that different people over different times, over centuries can understand, which is phenomenal. It's timeless. So when Allah talks about, for example, the universe, we created it with the power and we are expanding it, right? The traditional understanding, I believe, by Ibn Abbas, or radiallahu an, one of the companions, was the universe is big. That's it. This is big. Now, that's not a miracle. It's not like, wow, look, science, Quran predates science. No, it just meant the universe is big and it does look big. Well done. But that's not the point. The Quran is trying to point you to what you know, even if it's limited, to conclude something spiritual, to conclude who created the vastness of the universe. What does it mean about His power and wisdom? He deserves praise. Do you see the point? But that could be a primitive understanding of the verse. But when you move on, you're like, okay, well, now we have a little bit more information. Apparently the universe is expanding. Some say it just expanded. I believe there's a difference of opinion now amongst some scientists. It stopped expanding, or it's continuing expanding, or whatever. The point is, the interesting thing about the grammatical structure of that verse, it could mean all. It could mean it expanded. It was expanded. It could mean it's continually expanding. I'm not saying that is what is the intended meaning, but isn't it interesting that the Quran is timeless from that point of view, that it can address different mindsets over time. For example, the other verse, when Allah talks about yasbahuna, that the celestial objects are swimming. This is not nothing, wow, the Quran predates science. No, it's not meant for that. Imagine a 7th century desert Arab looking into the ocean of space, and he's looking at the celestial objects swimming, literally. But the verse is not meant to say, look at this great detail we've discovered for you. No, it's to get you to think and ponder and think, well, who does that? What power does that? What kind of wisdom and power is behind that? Allah, He deserves worship. Do you see? So a primitive understanding could be, yeah, the sun and moon do have their orbit. And it could actually make you agree with your misunderstanding that the sun goes around the earth, which is totally false, right? Because some had that approach, that the sun does go around the earth. But the language is in such a way that it's timeless that it could agree with your limited primitive views but conclude a truth. But interestingly, if you fast forward to the 21st century, even when we think we have the correct view, we can still have a correct interpretation and yet conclude the same truth. Because we know the sun does have its own orbit. It takes 226 or 29 million years to do so, and it orbits the Milky Way, right? Do you see? So it depends how you see it. But it's not meant to say, oh look, the Quran predates science. No, that's not the nature. The whole point of these verses is to indicate, look at what's going on. Whatever primitive understanding you have of the world and the universe, that's your primitive understanding. Because the Quran is for all people, right? So whatever limited understanding you have, reflect. Once you reflect, the conclusion is always going to be the same. Divine power, wisdom is worthy of worship and praise. And you see that over time. And that's why in the classical discourse you see different interpretations of these particular verses, especially when there was no prophetic guidance behind these verses, and you had to rely on the language. And the language is multi-layered. Fine, it's not an infinite number of meanings, but there are some layers of meaning. And it's interesting when you do a study of the Quranic discourse concerning these ambiguous verses concerning natural phenomena, that they have many layers of meaning, and these layers of meaning can address different understandings over time. For me, it doesn't make the Quran a scientific miracle, but it makes it amazing from the point of view that it's timeless. Because it doesn't use a language only for the 7th century, and that is fascinating.
Can you define the word epistemic?
Epistemic means knowledge, basically. Yeah, truth, knowledge. Any other questions? Oh, online. Let's go back to the good old line. Okay, good. It's a good question. You say that atheism is true. However, atheists think that atheism is a lack of belief. Agreed. But why do they have this lack of belief? For some of them, so there's different, from a practical point of view, they would argue that the current evidence for God's existence is not convincing. That's a truth claim. Is that claim true? Well, yeah, well that means you have a knowledge claim. And we're just saying, can you have knowledge claims like that under evolutionary reliabilism? And the answer is no. That's the point. So, you could try and fudge your way out of this situation, but it doesn't work because there are some implications to a lack of belief. Okay, well, let me ask you a question. Why do you have a lack of belief? So, in our discussion, I could give you an argument. You may say to me, I think that argument is false or it's not convincing. All right, well, these two things are truth claims. If they're truth claims, they assume you have reliable cognitive faculties that could produce true beliefs. If that's the case, can you explain that under the Darwinian mechanism? That's the point.
If they can't explain it, they can also say that we assume it, we don't explain it, we can't explain it, we assume it. But then when we do science, when we do mathematics, when we do maths, we also have many assumptions that
absolutely
we can't prove. So what's wrong with me or an atheist, not me, but an atheist?
Good question.
That, why can't I assume this and why do I have to prove it?
Very good question.
Because I don't have to prove the assumptions I make to do maths or to do...
Agreed. The argument here is not about proving.
Yeah.
The argument here, if you remember in the beginning, is you can hold assumptions you can't prove, but if your worldview negates your own assumption, then you have a problem. So when you do mathematics and in the philosophy of maths, it says infinities exist, and then when you're doing your math, it denies infinities, then you got a problem with your assumption, right? That's the point. So of course, in science there's lots of assumptions, in philosophy there's lots of assumptions, in theism there's lots of assumptions. It becomes a problem when your worldview, your concept, your idea, or your lack of belief, or whatever you want to call it, starts denying the very assumption that holds that concept of belief. That's the issue here. We're not saying they have to prove. They have to justify evolutionary reliabilism in light of their assumption that they have truth, reliable cognitive faculties. They have to justify that natural selection or Darwinism or evolution can actually explain that adequately. But if we find that actually no, this very belief of evolution, which is the kind of current belief of the philosophical naturalist, if that belief itself leads to skepticism, then you need to be consistent. Because your own worldview is denying your very assumption that you have truth, reliable cognitive faculties. So yeah, we're not saying they have to prove their assumptions. We're saying, well, you still need to justify them if your worldview starts to seemingly negate your assumption. That would be a massive problem. All right, let's check for any more online questions. No, there's no more. Okay, yeah, there's a point that someone says, you say that atheists should be skeptical of their rationality. What would that mean practically? i.e., so atheists cannot claim truth or true beliefs without any conviction. Well, from my understanding, an atheist who is a philosophical naturalist, they don't believe in the divine, they don't believe in supernatural, they believe that everything could be explained by physical processes, and they believe the physical process that explains their assumption that you have truth, reliable cognitive faculties, is Darwinism. So they have that assumption. I would okay, let me just repeat that. I just confused myself thoroughly. Too many isms and schisms there. So let me start again. So what would it mean practically? Well, if an atheist is a philosophical naturalist, and philosophical naturalism has the assumption that you have truth, reliable cognitive faculties, yeah, and that can be explained via evolution reliabilism, and we have come to the conclusion that evolution reliabilism should really, if you want to be consistent, make you adopt skepticism that you can't, that truth and knowledge is impossible from that point of view, then the implications are when they make truth claims about religion or religious arguments, they can't make them in a way that assumes they have truth, reliable cognitive faculties. They have to make them in a way that they're skeptics. So they should say, you might be right, you might be wrong. So they don't really have a forceful argument, that's the point. So the epistemic finger is cut off. Not that we want to cut off any fingers, of course, by the way, just for the purposes of the recording. Another one.
In regards to that question, yeah? I mean, when we meet those kind of people that whatever you say to them, they say, I don't know. Yeah, do this, I don't know. You know, it comes to that level where they just deny everything. Are we right to consider those people to be just I can't think of the right word, but I mean
cop out, like a cop out, yeah. Yeah, well, not really, because even in Islam, there's so many things that we don't know, right? Yeah. Like a sister asked me yesterday after a talk, the issue of predestination and divine decree. I said, look, we don't know. There's no philosophical solution.
Yeah, she was, when they go to a level of, denying the obvious.
Yeah, well, that's the point. So what I would say is, well, then we addressed earlier when the sister asked the question, well, you need to find out what's clouding the innate disposition. It might not be an intellectual issue, it might be an emotional, psychological, historical, whatever one, yeah? So you need to assess what that is. Usually, if someone's humorous and, they're like willing to have a laugh, I'll be like, are you sure that you don't know? Right, do you get my point? How sure are you that you don't know? Yeah. Who's the one that doesn't know? Are you sure it's you? I mean, you could do this like crazy game of being a fundamentalist skeptic, if you like, yeah, that you're skeptical about absolutely everything. But let's be practical. I don't think those skeptics actually exist. In my view. But yeah, I mean, the don't know is actually humility as well. So, and it depends what they're saying that they don't know, right? And if they don't know, then give them information. But then you may have to assess, and that's why I don't know how to answer that question unless I know the individual, because the individual is every individual is different. Like you could be debating an atheist about, the cosmological argument, but their main issue is that they don't know how to explain the fact that their mother passed away when they were 3 years old. But because you don't listen with the intention to understand, you think, oh, they just need some kind of cosmological argument. But no, if you listen with the intention to understand, you would have realized that there's something else that they need. They need another engagement, which is about the problem of evil, or they just need answers about, real heavy questions. Do you see my point? So it depends who's saying I don't know. That would be my answer. Yeah. All right, let's just check for any more online. Yep, God. So there's a question. God made you rational, fine, but are we only rational creatures, or is there more to us than that? What plays a role in us becoming to our beliefs? Absolutely, absolutely. I don't know if the questioner was listening what we said just before the break. We basically came to the conclusion that, you know, in the Islamic discourse, the human being is not defined as some kind of functional model. It's not a computer that you type in an algorithm and you're going to get some beliefs. The human being is a nafs, is a ruh, is a soul, is a qalb, is a spiritual heart, is an aql, and the aql, the intellect, is a function of the heart, and we have the fitrah, the innate disposition, and all of these things are in a dynamic interplay. So, you know, it's not just about rational arguments. And when we zoomed into the fitrah, we know there is truth within the innate disposition, that Allah is a reality, He deserves worship, He deserves praise, but it gets clouded. Rationality, sound rational arguments can be a means to uncloud the innate disposition to awaken the truth within, but it might not be. Something else might be required, like buying someone a pizza, or being nice to them, right? Or exploring the spirituality of Islam, or talking about why Allah is worthy of worship, why God is worthy of worship. We don't know what might uncloud the innate disposition. So it's true, it's not just rational arguments. And in actual fact, when it comes to belief is totally metaphysical. Only Allah guides. You could have the best arguments in the world and it will not give you faith, it will not give you iman. The truth could be staring you in the face, but you could be totally blind to it. And that's why we shouldn't be under the illusion that, you know, there's some kind of divine algorithm that if we get it right, it leads to faith. No, this is a mercy from Allah. The fact that we are able to believe and connect with Allah is a mercy. Sometimes we think, no, I know how to solve the problem. If I get my creed right, I read the right books, and I do this and I do that, I'm going to have iman. No way. And if you think that, then be careful. Be careful. Because you're going to learn a few lessons in your life when you get older. Life's going to kick you in the mouth, it's going to be dark, and you're going to try and find your teeth. Yeah, man. Because especially from a spiritual point of view, you have to understand that iman is the greatest gift that Allah can give you. And it's not based on some kind of abstract divine algorithm. These things are helpful. It could be that they need evolutionary reliabilism to be undermined in order to uncloud the innate disposition to awaken the truth within. But it could not be. That's why I said these slides could be just good enough for you to throw in the bin. Depends who you're talking to. That's why these series are just a tool set for you. Because it may be that you might require it, and it may be that it's unnecessary. Do you see the point? So yeah, the questioner is absolutely right. So, any other questions? Right, questions from the floor?
What motivates atheists? You know, before maybe 20 years ago, 30 years ago, we didn't have this strong case for, or people didn't come out and give the atheistic dawah, the atheists, you know. But what's motivating them now to come out and be very vocal and, you know, go out maybe in a Hyde Park or wherever, or on the streets and say atheism is true? Why is that changed?
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. Everyone's different.
But you've noticed the change, haven't you?
Yeah, there is. But I think the change, maybe it was already there, but because of the advent of social media, remember, there's a correlation because of social media, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, etc. And these different ideologies actually expressing themselves. So, and you know, they had leaders post 9/11. You know, when they saw religion doing evil things, and they were like, you know, affected by the kind of media propaganda, as if only religion does evil things, which is not true. You know, if you study your history, you see that actually religion's got a good track record, generally speaking, if you compare it to ideologies such as Marxism, right? Chairman Mao, Pol Pot, Stalin killing 6 million Christians, I believe. I mean, it was crazy, right? So ideology is the problem, not religion per se. So yeah, so it's advent of social media, people writing books, maybe theists, Muslims not articulating themselves properly, right? Science has, you know, really given us some amazing things, and it seems to work. And sometimes as human beings, we fall for logical fallacies. We think just because something works, it means it's absolutely true. That's not always the case. As anyone knows, especially in the philosophy of science, things were working and they gave us truths, but then they found out that that model wasn't true anymore, right? So the issue here is, I don't know. I think everyone's different. Allah says in the Quran, in Surah Al-Imran, verse 113, they are not the same. Right? People are different. So we don't know what motivates them. It could be a whole range of things. Generally speaking, from a spiritual point of view, I believe kufr, which is the denial of truth, is fundamentally based on hawa and kibr, which is desires and arrogance in some way. Yeah. Generally speaking, kind of thing. So I do believe there is something basic and fundamental to a rejection of truth. But as you know, our classical tradition is very nuanced, and it depends if they rejected the truth. You don't know. There could have been people who didn't even hear about Islam, or maybe they, Al-Ghazali, the 11th century theologian, would argue even if people hear negative things and that's all they hear, then maybe they're going to be tested on the Day of Judgment. And there is a prophetic tradition that alludes to that as well. So it's very nuanced. I mean, we have to consider the individual as an individual, and that's why it's very dangerous when it comes to individual discourse for you to basically pre-frame them. So if John the atheist comes up to you and says, I'm an atheist, I don't want you guys thinking, right, science arguments now, this, that and the other, he's arrogant, he's a Richard Dawkins fan. It's not the case at all. And I learned it the hard way when I had a debate with Professor Ken Jeems a few years ago, quite a few years ago now, about 5 or 6 years ago, in Queen Mary University. And I was, he's a professor. Who the hell was I 5 or 6 years ago? And I'm doing, deductive arguments, God's existence, and he was arguing too. But he was a really nice guy, and he gave me advice that don't fall for he's an atheist. He's a Nietzsche scholar of Nietzsche, right? He's such a good professor that he became a professor without writing a book, and to become a professor in England without writing a book is rare. And at the end of the debate, we had this little discussion, and he made me realize that his atheism had nothing to do with his philosophical arguments. He said, look, Hamza, we need values from you people. Forget this argument with the new atheists. He said, I don't like the new atheists. He said that. He said, we want to hear about values. And then he said, my son is disabled. I've been taking care of him for years. I don't know how to answer that question, kind of thing. And I felt like a worm. Because arrogant. Because that's it. I was as arrogant, man. There's nothing else to say. I was arrogant, and I couldn't connect with him because his issue was something else, and I'm like talking about some kind of abstract deductive arguments. Yeah. So we need to be very careful. We need to listen with the intention to understand. Listen, because if you listen with the intention to understand, then you're really looking out for their meaning, not for their words. Because the words are vehicles to meaning, correct? But we just catch on the words, but you said this, and therefore I could refute you. So, hold on a second. When someone says to me, one of my weaknesses, not being understood, yeah? It's my weakness. And if someone says to me, what do you mean, Hamza? I'm like, oh my God, what a beautiful human being. They're trying to understand who I am, man. But we don't do that, especially in the Muslim community as well. Amongst Muslims, yeah? He said this, we must refute him. Shut up. Do your bed. Yeah? Take care of your mum. These people, so-called activists online, they probably don't even clean up their own bed, yeah? You see, they don't even give salams to their mother probably. Honestly, wallahi. They don't do the basic things. I think you can refute people left, right and center just because of a tweet or because of this. Wallahi, it's disgusting. It's disgusting. Anyway, this is my rant, yeah? My chip on my shoulder. But you get my point, yeah? So we have to fundamentally learn the prophetic way of listening to people. People felt loved when they were listening and speaking and engaging with the Prophet ﷺ, yeah? Like, that person becomes the center of your universe. Well, that's hard to do. And you want to listen out for their meaning, not for their words. So if you end their statement or conversation by saying, but, that means you are manufacturing a response while you are listening to them. That means you're not really listening to them. When someone says but to me, I'm like, look bro, you're not being present with me. If you're not present with me, I'm not going to have a conversation with you. Yeah, because you need to value my humanity, my time. And we lack that within the Muslim community, and we lack it outside of the Muslim community. So not only must we listen with the intention to understand, but we must also do this. We must have creative listening. What does that mean? I'm listening out for your possibility. So say someone is an atheist, and you're listening with the intention to understand, but you're also listening out for the potential Muslim. You're listening out for the sincere person. You're listening out for the wise person. You're listening out for the person who could tolerate you. You're listening out for the person who can engage with you positively. If you listen out for that, and you speak to them in that way, you create that person from them. And they wouldn't even know. Because human beings are what? were sets of were a realm of possibility. Isn't it interesting? The Prophet ﷺ, I think he wrote a letter, or he told someone to say to Khalid bin Walid, who was an enemy of Islam at that time. He said, it's something to the nearest effect, it's quite weird, or that such a wise person is not a Muslim. What did he just do? He created something from Khalid bin Walid, wisdom, by virtue of the way he communicated and listened out for that particular person. So even if someone is hating on you, right? Listen out for the possibility of, this person's a good person. This person is someone who can listen to me. They're rational, they're spiritual, they're loving, they're kind, they want to engage with me, they're sincere. You listen out for that person, and when you communicate, you're communicating to that possibility of that person. I'm telling you, create something from them that they didn't even realize. And I've seen this in my own discussions with an EDL supporter. He hugged me at the end. I think I was the first person in the United Kingdom first Muslim to be hugged by an EDL member. It's online, you see it. It's about 10 years ago now. I wasn't using all of these techniques, I've learned them the hard way, but I was using some of them in some way. Maybe even accidentally. But I'm telling you, if Muslims have the prophetic character of listening and creating stuff from people, Allahu Akbar, the way you engage with other people will transform. That's why I really believe, look, I'm just going to be very honest with you, right? Since it's getting a bit late and my defenses are going down. This is all rubbish, man. Evolution, reliabilism, this is bakwas, as we say in Urdu, not that I speak Urdu. Let me tell you why it's bakwas. It's rubbish in the grand cosmic scheme of things. Yes, it's needed, maybe to uncloud the fitra, to awaken the truth within, but fundamentally, engaging with human beings is primarily about psychology. 100%. It's about psychology. How do you come across? What is your state of being? How do you relate to yourself? How do you relate to others? How do you relate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Because Islam is not a mundane belief. Like, I believe this is a phone. Are you saying Islam is equivalent to saying this is a phone? What kind of rubbish are we talking about? This is why our youth are leaving Islam. Because we think Islam is an ethno-religious cult. You're going to be a Muslim, pray 5 times a day. You don't know why, but to do it this way, no problem. Say Bismillah, say Allahu Akbar. Go to the toilet with this way, wash your posterior this way. It's all do's and don'ts. They don't know the why. It's just an ethno-religious cult. And if you slightly deviate from the norm, you're not one of us. Don't get me wrong, we have our positions and we have our orthodoxy, but it's the way we come across on our psychology. Sometimes it's all about identity markers, isn't it? Right? Is your beard long enough? Is your hijab covering yourself properly? Do you have a long enough dress? This, that, and the other. Oh my God, who? These are all important, but the in and the out have to come together, right? Anyway, the point is, Islam is not just a mundane proposition. Islam is a form of knowing that transforms your heart, transforms what you say and how you relate to yourself, how you relate to others, and how you relate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Islam changes fundamentally your state of being, how you become in the world, right? Islam is not just an abstract belief. Yeah, you could cheat, you could lie, you could slander. I was with Sheikh Akram Nadwi yesterday, and he made a really, really interesting point. I don't know if it's fundamentally true, but it was very insightful. He said, some people believe in the survival of the fittest, but Islam believes the survival of the most beneficial. Because Allah would always give barakah, blessing, to those who benefit humanity the most. And maybe the reason why the Muslim world, the Muslim community is not where it should be, is because we have stopped becoming beneficial to others.
We just think about our own souls.
Yeah, look bro, do you know the name of your neighbor? Who knows the second name of their neighbor? Come on, man. And now you want to change the world. Let's be humble. Wait, let's be humble. We have all these activists online. Let's change the world. Islam. Woohoo. Allahu Akbar. Yeah? Ask them. Wallahi. Ask them. Do you know your neighbor's second name? Ask them. Just ask them. I'm not hating here. But I'm just saying, Islam is not a stupid religion. Right? There are some things we just have to put into place. Allah says, by your hands and what they've earned, there will be corruption on the land and the sea. What we do, our moral actions affect the structure of the cosmos, whether we like it or not. Look at the Sahabi in Kitab al-Zuhud, the Sahabi, the companion of the Prophet ﷺ. He would feed the anthill next to his home breadcrumbs. And they would ask him, what are you doing? And he would say that, I don't want to be held accountable on the day of judgment. I kept my neighbors hungry. That was the psychology of these people. but we don't even know who's next door. I mean, don't get me wrong, I got a lot to improve on that matter as well, yeah? So I don't want to be accused for hypocrisy, but there needs to be a collective sense of coming back to our tradition. Because I think some studies show that people don't really become Muslim just because of an abstract intellectual belief. Usually it's because of interaction with other Muslims and positive behaviors, and it creates those awakenings, yeah? And that's why it's very important that we can't underestimate the vehicle to the message, which is the messenger, right? And we are messengers in a way, not in a theological sense, but we are like walking in the footsteps of the Prophet ﷺ. So we need to start to adopt those characteristics, you know, like, you know, when Allah talks about sharing Islam in chapter 41 verse 33, when Allah says, and who is better in speech than the one who calls to Allah, does righteous deeds and says, I am one of those who submit, I am one of the Muslims. That's verse 33. The verse straight after that, 34, says, good and evil are not the same. Repel by that which is better. And if there's hatred and enmity between two people, it will turn into intimate friendship. That's the kind of meaning here. The scholars say that repel by that which is better means repel anything, because the Arabic word for repel is not followed by a direct object. And what does repel anything by that which is better mean? It means repel anything by that which is more virtuous and that which is more beautiful. So we must become people of virtue and people of beauty. And it has to be seen. I don't like the argument that's a bit of a kind of, I call it a Marxist socialist argument, that oh, the system makes us like this, and you know, we need to blame the system because it's not allowing us to express ourselves as a Muslim community properly, and it makes us bad. That argument is so shallow and it's self-defeating, because the Prophet ﷺ was just him and a few companions. Did he blame the system? They were able to make change by virtue of their connection with God. Are you saying Islam that comes from the Lord of the heavens and the earth, kun fayakun, that creates, that says be and it is? You're saying that there's this kind of, you know, system that's making us bad people? I find that an insult to Allah and His religion. Because you're saying these values don't have the power to change individuals and therefore change the collective. It's a shallow argument. And it doesn't work anyway, because I want to know where the Zionists were when you couldn't wake up to pray Fajr. You couldn't wake up in the morning to pray. Where were the Zionists? Were they under your bed? They're Islamophobes. They were in your kitchen, yeah, making you bacon and eggs, man. You couldn't wake up for Fajr, right? Do you see my point? Let's be honest, right? And this creates a kind of it creates a victim mindset, a victimhood. Don't get me wrong. People are victimized for sure, and we must command the good, forbid the evil. But this doesn't mean now you adopt the psychology of a victimhood. This is not in our tradition. Because it means you give them power. But we know behind everything is the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Anyway, final question. One more question. Let's take one more question, we're done.
In regards to the system, don't you think it would be beneficial, or would it not help the Muslims if they had an Islamic system? So in an Islamic system you have Islamic schooling. So a lot of the evil that's around you, that's affecting you and making you...
Yeah, but this is not applicable to today's discourse from the point of view that you don't have what you just mentioned. Yeah. So what do you do now? What's the solution now?
Some people would say to work for the system.
Yeah, but how do you do that?
And you've got various different methods that people employ.
Yeah, of course. And a lot of those methods are just the reactions to 1960s communism. What I would say is, and I'm not a scholar on this issue, so I'm not giving a fatwa for sure, but my own pondering on this issue is that Allah says, you know...
He's arguing you made that, you know, isn't it enough for Allah to give you all of those values? I mean, some people would argue that in the Islamic system you have those values being propagated, which will have an effect upon...
Yeah, no, I don't dismiss the idea that if you have collective structures in a collective that emanate certain values or express certain values, that you're more likely to adopt those values. But that's normal social psychology. I mean, this is just, it's like saying the sky is blue. No one's denying that. We're saying we're here where we are. The Muslim community is not going anywhere in Britain. So we have a role to play. We have to feel part of our community, just like the Anbiya, like the prophets did. They consider them Ya Qawmi, oh my people, right? Even to the point where Lut alayhi salam was technically offering his own daughters to the people of Lut, right? He's offering the women amongst them, right? And that included his daughters. So they had this sense of concern and compassion. The Prophet ﷺ said in a hadith in Tarikh al-Kabir, narrated by Bukhari, which is sahih, it's authentic, said, love for linnas, love for humanity what you love for yourself. There's another hadith in Bukhari that says, love for your brother what you love for yourself, but that means humanity too. What did An-Nawawi say in his explanation of this hadith? It means what? It means insaniyya, human brotherhood. But what does that mean? It means love goodness for them and love guidance for them. So that's our filter in the beginning. We want goodness and guidance for everybody, and that must manifest in our behaviors and our actions. And also we have to have an internal fixing up as well, because you're not going to get the external if you ignore the internal, right? It doesn't work that way. I don't think it's ever worked that way, yeah, in history, yeah. So, there are various traditions. For example, authentic tradition in Tirmidhi where, and I'm paraphrasing, the Prophet said that if a man with good morals comes to your daughter and you reject him for no good reason, there'll be fitna and fasad in the world. There'll be trials and tribulation in the world. So if a black brother comes to an Asian father and says, and he's known for his good morals, he goes to the Asian father and says, I want your daughter's hand, and he rejects him for no Islamic reason. So just because of the color of his skin, which is fundamentally incidental, yeah, it's accidental in the grand cosmic scheme of things. The Prophet ﷺ is saying there'll be fitna and fasad in the world. So I don't like this kind of argument that, if you have the system, it's all going to be all good. No, it's actually the other way around. You fix up, then you get the gift. You get success, you get justice, you get mercy, right? Because the Prophet ﷺ is saying these are basic certain things. If you don't put them in place, then there's fitna and fasad in the world, on the world, right? But how can you blame? There's only one person doing it, bro. There's only a few people doing it. Well, the Prophet, it's the prophetic words, not mine, right? And when Allah says, "Inna Allah la yughayyiru," indeed Allah will not change the situation of a people until they change what's within themselves, which means that Allah would not change your situation from goodness to evil unless you start becoming evil, kind of thing, right? So, we have a responsibility. Islam is a heavy thing on one's shoulder. It's an amana. It's a trust between you and the Lord of the heavens and the earth. And just saying it's someone else's fault all the time undermines that trust fundamentally. Imagine the Prophet did that and the Sahaba did that. Where would we be now? And that's why don't underestimate individual change, because if you think about it, the Sahaba developed the Prophet developed the Sahaba. Mu'adh ibn Jabal, for example, Musab ibn Umair, one individual, right? Where did they go? Yemen, Medina, correct? One person. It was one person. It wasn't a system. It wasn't a collective. If you study the da'wah, the sharing of Islam of Musab ibn Umair radiallahu an, it was his Quran, from what I remember. He stood up and started sharing Quran. Do you see my point? So it's not as I can see your point. Yeah, I know you can, but I deliberately don't get involved in politics anymore because I think it's a thorough waste of time. And I focus on values. I don't want to come across as saying that I've been there, done that, worn the t-shirt, although I probably have, but I don't want to come across that way in that sense, because these things are unknown to me. I leave it to the scholars to discuss. And within our realm of control, what we need to do is share this beautiful message of Islam with people in a way that we believe we're actually part of the people. And that's why I have a philosophy. If you don't believe you're part of this community, if you don't feel part of the British community, then I have been known to say then you shouldn't be here. Not in a bad way, not in a right-wing sense, but anyway, you should think about your kind of social engagement in this society. Because if you don't have the right ethical Islamic filters in engaging with your fellow citizen and brother in humanity, then you have a problem. And the way you're going to come across is going to actually make things much worse. So it's better you stay silent. Because the prophetic method is that you have genuine concern for people. They're your qawm, they're your people. It's come from the point of loving for others what you love for yourself, which you want goodness for people and you want guidance for people. Imagine you started with that perspective, so many things will change the way you relate to other people. Try it. Let's see what happens. Let's try it. Yeah, we've tried everything else, it's not working. And I think Einstein said if you do something all the time expecting different results, then you're a bit crazy. So anyway, may Allah bless you. Jazakallah khair. The bibliography is in your notes, and see you very soon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.